What's up, folks? I've got an exciting one for you. This is probably something I have the most knowledge on based on experience and what I've been doing a lot of lately, and that's bladed jig fishing. Or if we're not being sacrilegious and we're talking about what this guy's going to be fishing, jackhammer fishing. Any chatterbait, any bladed jig, this is going to apply for. And so, what we're going to talk about in this video is a couple of things. One, we're going to talk about colors, common colors you need to use. We're going to talk about common situations you're going to throw this bait. And then we're also going to talk about the ultimate retrieves that you're going to use, common types of retrieves. And so again, we're going to go over colors in this video. We're going to go over places you're going to use this bait, and we're going to go over common retrieves. So if any of that interests you, stay tuned. All right, so let's talk about colors a little bit. Colors really come down a lot of times to the conditions that you're fishing, not necessarily the condition or the structure that you're fishing. A lot of it's going to come down to water clarity. It's also going to come down to how much light, and that's what I'm really looking for most of the time. And it also can be what the fish are feeding on. So those are some things to keep in mind. Let's just go through them here. No certain order. White and chartreuse. I'm going to use a white and chartreuse whenever I think that fish are on shad, especially if it's low light, muddy water, combination of the three or a combination of any of those. That's when I'm going to be using that color. I'm not saying that it has to be those conditions, but those are conditions I've done really well in. Does not have to be grass. So we're going to get into conditions later that you'll be throwing it in, but that's one type of color. This bruised green pumpkin, that's your good middle ground. It's got some black and blue in there. It's got green pumpkin. You can either put a black and blue trailer on it, or I have a green pumpkin trailer on there. Can't really see it because it's faded in, but I'm always going to put a little bit of chartreuse on the end of that. To me, that makes it look a lot like a bluegill or some kind of bait fish that they're going to eat. And that darker color and presentation, I'm going to be using it really when it's low light, especially whenever it's dark water. But it could also be super clear water as well. So this is really just kind of a good all around. You can use this color any day, anytime, any condition. Then you got some more specialty types. You can use this in a lot of conditions, but this right here, this green pumpkin shad with this disco trailer on there, that's something that you're ultimately going to use whenever it's pretty clear. You can use this bait whether it's sunny or whether it's clear water or maybe even a little bit stained water. But this right here is going to be really just something that's going to be more finesse. Right, so if you can see it, I'd say 6 inches to a foot below the water. Don't be afraid to use this. Know that you always got the thump of the blade on there to add some extra color. Here's kind of another variation, even more sleeper. This is actually the sleeper blade by Jackhammer, so that's even more subtle, right? You're not even going to see the blade on that. It's going to be a little more subtle thump. Then we start getting into things that are more conditioned to specialty situations. So really cold water, this fire crawl color is going to work really well. And I'd say, between that 45 to 65-ish range. It can be used outside of those range depths, but in temperature wise, if you see those temperatures, this bait will definitely work regardless of what water clarity is. It does not matter, from the clearest of the clear all the way to the very muddy. At the end of the day, I'm probably going to go with something more like this style trailer if it's super muddy, because it's more opaque than this. You can kind of see through this a little bit. Both would work. That would be better in muddier water. But this fire crawl here is going to be something that you can use in colder temperatures, or whenever it's super, muddy water, or when it's a little dark outside, or when you want to just use something totally different. Don't be afraid to use this any time of year. Then you got things that are going to be a little more aligned to certain bait types. So this is more like, to me, like a gizzard shad type of representation, but it could also be shad because it's got the white on the belly there. But really, it's a bait fish color. This is green pumpkin shad with a green pumpkin shad Zacho trailer on there. I'll use that in a little bit more stained water than I will something with the green pumpkin and the disco on there. So if it's a little more stained or it's a little darker outside, I'll go to this. Typically have more success Got the straight black and blue. Again, that's a classic, just like the bruised green pumpkin. These two, you can see the colors are not too different from each other. This is just a little darker here on this one. But these are both really good low light and also bright day, clear water, dark water, just all good all around colors. You can use these anytime, literally any time of year, any type of water, whatever. Then I kind of showed you this one right here, but this guy right here is really good in muddy water. It's going to be really good in low light. This is Bee Height Crawl is the color on the jackhammer, and that Zacho trailer is green pumpkin, red and black flake with orange belly there. And then last but not least, Brett's bluegill. I've got this tied on, you can see, because I've been using it a lot lately. Anytime you're around a bluegill pattern, I actually am on a shad spawn right now, but this bluegill pattern is what I was getting my bites on. And I think that's honestly because the fish just get so tired of seeing the same thing and eating the same thing. It's like you eat a bunch of chips and eventually you want something else, right? You want something sweet or something different. So I don't think fish are really any different. And that really kind of covers the grounds on colors. If y'all have any questions, put them in the comments. If you have certain conditions or I didn't cover maybe what you were expecting there, let me know. I'm happy to give you some input. So now let's start talking about conditions. So conditions, we're talking about, you know, both what it looks like outside, but also just, you know, what cover I'm throwing in more than anything. You know, at the end of the day, if I'm throwing in rocks or I'm throwing in wood or I'm throwing in grass or I'm throwing in a soft bottom, I'm still going to be throwing a jackhammer in all those situations. That may surprise some folks. A lot of people only throw it in grass and around grass or standing grass or something involving grass. And maybe they'll throw it around docks or something like that, but they really keep it simple. For me, this thing can be thrown anywhere. I've caught fish suspended with it. I've caught fish on the bottom. I've caught fish, you know, burn it across the top. I've caught it straight. So really, there's just not a way that you can't throw it, right? So that's my point there. And there's not a condition you can't throw it in. But let's just talk about a little bit of specifics here. So general baseline, of course, if you're fishing around grass, you're going to be looking for what bait type. If they're eating bluegill, I'm going to be going with something that looks more like a bluegill pattern of some sort, darker colored, more bluegill colored, something of that variation. And I'm going to go back and forth on colors until I figure out what they're biting. You know, with stained water, I'm going to go with a little more bright or a little darker color, either or. Same thing with dark outside. You know, anytime it's dark colors. It's just a good general rule. It's not steadfast, but that's a good general rule. And if it's super clear water, I actually did this recently on Canyon Lake and on Lake Bastrop, both very clear water lakes. This bait right here did really well for me. Green pumpkin shad with that green disco. I was just, you know, ripping it through the grass. I was straight reeling it through the grass. I was feathering it through a lot of different techniques I was using. But this bait right here did really well for me. But I also did really well with the black and blue. Whenever I was fishing on Canyon Lake anyway, and that's a super clear day, or clear lake, and it was the brightest day that I did well on that. Actually, when it was overcast the next day, I couldn't get bit on the black and blue for whatever reason. I only got bit on this green pumpkin with the disco. I didn't change it up and go with anything darker. That water was like 10 plus feet visibility, no reason to. They could see it fine. So that gives you an idea on that. You know, if you're fishing around rocks, same thing on colors. Nothing changes, right? It's all the same color selections I just mentioned. The only thing you're really going to change is maybe how you retrieve it, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. Same thing you get around wood. Same thing you get around docks. So, you know, all the rule things that I just said apply to any type of cover. Those bait selections are purely going to be based on, the color selections are purely going to be based on what the conditions look like outside and the watercolor. So again, dark water, dark outside, go with darker colors usually, or brighter colors, because that's going to stand out more, you know, something, you know, around here, also here, you know. If it is really bright outside and I've got clear water, then I'm going to be going with clearer colors, maybe even just a pure white, something like that. But I'm going to dull it down a lot. Green pumpkin, really good in clear water. Sometimes they want the black and blue, right? Again, there's no steadfast. I'm just kind of giving you some grounds to play in. So I hope that helps you out with colors. So now let's talk about retrieves. This right here, I think, is probably the most important part, and I did intentionally save it for last. But I feel like a lot of people do two things with a chatterbait of any kind. They throw it out and they reel it in. That's one type. Or they'll throw it out and they'll try to make contact with some type of cover, usually grass, and they'll rip it. Right? That works. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. You're going to catch a ton of fish like that. That is how I fished the jackhammer for over a year whenever I first started fishing it. And I won a tournament just straight reeling the dang thing. And I was bouncing it off of wood stumps. All I was doing. Nothing special. But that's what was getting bit that day. And there's still times where that will work again in the future. And I've seen it since, right? But recently I've started realizing that this is a very versatile bait. So I've told a lot of people I feel like it's a lot like a square bill. They look at me a little funny, but if you think about it, it's got a really tight wobble to it, good thump in the water, which is very similar to a fish, similar type of reaction bite on that. But then also, you can really get this thing down. I mean, if you look at the way this bill is made, this blade is made on this, it's just like a bill. Is that any different shape-wise? And look at that. Is that any different really shape-wise than a bill? I mean, maybe a little bit. But that looks just like a bill on a square bill to me. And it works the same way. You're going to literally contact cover with this thing, and it's just going to be beaten off of it. And the beautiful thing is now it really just depends on trailers, which, I'll talk a little bit about trailers because I think that's important here. When you're throwing in cover, I'm throwing the Zacho 90% of the time, but there's going to be times where I'm going to want to go to a Z-Crawl Junior would be the only other type I would throw it on there. And ironically, I have it rigged vertically because I was trying to mimic bluegill that day, and it worked really well, by the way. But a lot of times when I'm throwing this, I'm actually going to turn it flat. There's a lot of other beaver style baits. If you, whichever one you prefer, I like the Z-Crawl Junior. Use your beaver of preference. no joke there. But we're going to make it flat. And that flat is ultimately going to help you bounce. I'll turn it sideways so it makes more sense. It's going to bounce off of that cover a lot better. Same thing over wood. It just helps you not get hung up is the reason that you're going to use that. And that's purely the only reason in most cases. Rare situations like this one, I wanted to downsize and I wanted to be a little more size of the bait that I was seeing and profile of the bait I was seeing. That day, this just did not match what I seen around, and that change made a lot of difference. So conditions kind of come down to that as well. But also let's talk about one technique I've recently really started doing well on, and that's what I call feathering it through. And I'll give Bass Fishing HQ, I'll give him credit. He actually was the person I heard make this comment. But it's the same concept that he had in one of his videos. You're going to throw this thing out and you're simply going to sweep your rod tip back to you. So you can let it sink all the way to the bottom, just like a jig, and you're going to sweep your rod back, just like you would with a Texas rig or a jig, just a little bit faster because you're going to want to feel the thud of that blade. And slower the better, really, in my opinion. But there's days, obviously, speeds, you can speed it up or slow it down. That's going to get more bites. But a lot of times for me, it's fishing it super slow, just feeling the dut, 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 dut of the blade and then reeling down and repeat, repeat, repeat. If I'm in shallower water, I'll pick it up versus sideways to keep it from getting hung up. But that gets a ton of bites. And it's a lot like stroking a jig, if you think about it. So really, this bait is super versatile. There's probably 100 ways I haven't thought about fishing it. But those ways work really well. Similar style of feathering it, but a little bit more of a vertical motion is just yo-yoing it, just like you would with any type of bait that you would yo-yo, whether that be a trap or that's a hair jig or a regular jig. Yo-yoing or stroking it off the bottom, just giving your rod a pump and letting it fall down, pump, letting it fall down, pump, letting it fall down. I've got a lot of fish like that as well. And really, I think a lot of that is the fish are attracted to a chatterbait. They're attracted to the thump of it, of any kind of chatterbait. I don't care whether we're talking slobber knocker or jackhammer. I truly believe they will all work if you use them the right way. And it's the same reason all square bills work. They like that thump. Yeah, there's ones that work better and yada yada. I'm not getting into that in this video. The point is they all work. They work for the same reasons and they draw fish. It's a lateral line bait. It doesn't matter what clarity of water or what condition, the fish are going to react to it. They may run from it, which is no good, but a lot of times they're going to be attracted to it in some way. And so if you can get a fish to follow, it's just a matter of getting them to commit to it. And those little techniques will definitely make a big difference. And the last one I would say is very similar to a jig. I mean, literally throw your jackhammer out and drag it across the bottom. You may think that's exactly like throwing a jig and dragging it across the bottom, but I promise you it's not. There's a lot of sound going on with that blade rocking over things, and it's still rocking back and forth even though you can't feel it. It's making a lot of clanking and a lot of noise. And I've seen situations where I've thrown a jig in the same color and I've thrown that jackhammer in to cover, fished it the same way, and I've got bed fish and even non-bed fish to commit to that when they wouldn't commit to a regular jig. So to me, I think that really just comes down to something a little bit different. They probably don't see many jackhammers dragging across the bottom. In fact, I know they don't. And so that makes a big difference. And something I'm going to experiment this summer with. I can't say for certain this works, but I don't know how it's not going to. Is going to be burning it across the bottom just like you would a deep diving crankbait and going up to that 1.25 ounce jackhammer to do that. I'd think anything 15 foot or less, I mean, you're going to have to be really humming that thing to get it off the bottom at that weight. So you can keep your rod tip down, use fluorocarbon, which will help keep the bait down and drag the bottom. That is something I've done in shallow water, and I can say for a fact works. I was using this fire crawl on rocks here at a smallmouth lake, and these smallmouth, and I was catching largies too. But it was fishing a dam, and I was bouncing it off of boulders. Same concept I was saying earlier about it's just like a square bill. I was fishing it the same way, but here's the crazy thing. There's a ton of zebra mussels in this lake, and if I fished a square bill, my line was just chewed, just tore all to bits. But the way this is hitting, your line's up, it's not down. You know, it's totally different trajectory, and literally, I would have never thought about it if I hadn't fished them next to each other. But this thing was letting me go through those rocks without chewing my line up at all. I wasn't getting any nicks on it. And I could throw maybe 10 casts with that square bill, and I was having to retie. So, I mean, obviously you couldn't fish that, right? Because you're going to eventually break off a fish because that line is down there dragging across the rocks. Whereas with this guy, it was not doing it. And I was doing the same concept. I was literally slow rolling this across the bottom and beating it off of the boulders. So again, the clanking of that blade, clanking of that head, just something a little different. It was creating a triggered bite. And that's really all it was. Because I'd be reeling along and all of a sudden it would just get heavy and there they were. Right? That was purely just a reaction bite. That fish lay it on the bottom, you reel it by them and they smack it. So I hope this helps. That's a general breakdown. I'll probably do a video in the future where I get even more detailed than I did here. I feel like I was kind of abbreviated, but I did that intentionally. I didn't want to make this a long, boring video for somebody that was just trying to get a quick tip or two. But if y'all have any questions, put them in the comments. I'm happy to help out. I really appreciate y'all's support. If y'all hit a thumbs up on this, make a comment. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And I really appreciate y'all's support again, guys. Stay tuned for more.